Welcome back, everyone. There have been more and more stories about tech censorship and also technology becoming basically the arbiters of free speech, free expression, and also having the ability to shut down competitors, it seems, like with Parler on a whim. Now, to learn more about this and the idea of technocracy, what we are possibly moving towards, we have here to speak with us Patrick Wood. He's the Executive Director of Citizens for Free Speech. Hey, Patrick Wood, real great having you on.
Great. I'm glad to be with you, Joshua. Thank you.
So first of all, tell us what technocracy refers to.
This was an ideology that started, or a system that started back in the early 1930s at Columbia University in New York City. And engineers and scientists at that time believed capitalism was dead and that they, and only they, had some kind of a mandate to create a brand new economic system that was resource-based economic system that would control the entire economy. They failed, basically. There was a huge movement in the 30s and 40s in America, North America, and Canada as well. But it kind of fizzled in the mid-40s as the economy recovered. Capitalism was not dead. But it came back to life in the early 1970s, and it began to mature. And the global elite got a hold of the concept, finally, that this resource-based economic system could be a very keen way to grab the resources of the world and kind of control the whole economic system. And we've blossomed into that today. We see the fruit of this system today all over. For instance, the World Economic Forum's Great Reset that they're talking about right now. That basically is warmed over technocracy from the 1930s.
So oftentimes we hear the Great Reset. A lot of people think, oh, that's a socialist movement, or maybe it's just some weird idea they have. Now, we don't often hear people use the word technocracy. It's more like a sci-fi term, like a dystopian term. How do these relate to each other?
Well, over the years, the communist Marxist socialist meme has given way to the system of technocracy. I think it probably was best predicted by Zbigniew Brzezinski back in 1970. And remember, Brzezinski was the political scientist. He was a co-founder of the Trilateral Commission. He worked for Jimmy Carter as his national security advisor. Brzezinski was the guy that brought Deng Xiaoping to America and solidified relationships with then communist China, which looked a lot like North Korea does today. It was a train wreck by and large economically. But as they brought China back into the world stage, they didn't seed China with the concepts of free market economics, for instance. They fed them with the ideology of technocracy. That caused a blending, if you will, for some time between the CCP and communism in general and this technocratic system of social management, of total management of the economy and the people in it. And so today, we still see the trappings of communism around the world. We can see it in Russia, we can see it in China as well, and several other countries. But if you look deeper, you see that there's a group of people, a core of engineers and scientists that are working to use high technology to capture the entire society, all of the people in it, and to control and engineer the economic system.
Now, you mentioned the Great Reset, and you know this term, although it has been discussed openly by the World Economic Forum, it's often mixed in with conspiracy theories, and so a lot of people think it's conspiracy. How would you describe the idea of the Great Reset? Is it just something talked about within the World Economic Forum as an idea? Is it an actual plan? Is it a conspiracy? How would you describe it?
Yeah, actually, it's no conspiracy at all. Anybody can go to their website, weforum.org, I believe, and read everything they've said. I haven't tried of what they have said and tried to speculate what they mean, but it's all there. And Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, has written a couple of books, and those books are very clear as well. The concept now, you see all of the large global corporations jumping on this Great Reset idea, And in their mind, there's trillions of dollars at hand because if they are able to flip the economic system that we have today into a technocracy system, a resource-based system, then of that trillions of dollars, these guys want to line up and get a piece of that pie. That just makes perfect sense to me. It's like a feeding frenzy at the trout farm at the fishery. You know, where you throw the money out and everybody comes and chums for the money. But this basically is tightly coupled with the United Nations and its program of sustainable development. You'll see that all over World Economic Forum literature. And sustainable development is a resource-based economic system. Energy is at the center of it always, it seems like. And we can trace where Agenda 21, 2030 Agenda and sustainable development came from. Basically, it was fed to the United Nations by the original founders of this elite group, the Trilateral Commission, back in 1973. Brzezinski was part of that, by the way. So we've kind of come full circle. We've had a couple of name changes along the way to promote marketing of these whole ideas. Originally, technocracy was not a very good term for Americans, so they changed. They've called it sustainable development. They've called it smart growth in America. Now the World Economic Forum has a hold of it. They call it the Great Reset. It's just picture the Green New Deal on steroids. That's essentially what the World Economic Forum is talking about. And now all of the corporations of the world seem to be jumping on board.
Now, with this idea of this Great Reset or technocracy or whatever we want to call it, one of the big things we're seeing right now in the United States is big corporations basically flexing their muscles and showing that they have the power to silence people, that they could deplatform the President of the United States himself, to the extent that even foreign leaders like Angela Merkel in Germany are voicing their concerns about this as a precedent. An interesting turn because some people who don't support Trump are concerned about him being deplatformed by this big tech. They're also showing they can destroy companies pretty much on a whim, like what they did with Parler. Does this align with this agenda? And if so, how does it align?
I hate to say it absolutely aligns perfectly. And it isn't a total shock. It's a surprise, but it's not a shock that it was coming. We've seen this coming for a long time where the censorship of the exercise censorship of these big platforms has been increasingly worse. I spotted it probably 5 or 6 years ago. 2 years ago, or in 2018, 3 years ago, I was so alarmed at the collusion between these big platforms that's what caused me to found the nonprofit organization Citizens for Free Speech. And now today we see the collusion is absolutely in the open. There's no doubt about it now. When 3 big tech companies of the biggest, the Apple, Google, and Amazon can conspire to take down an entire operating company that happens to be a competitor as well, can take down a company like that in the course of one day by just disappearing them from the app stores and from, taking away the connections to their database and their processing power in the cloud. This is unprecedented. And they're still hiding behind this idea, well, it's, they violated our policy rules. No, I'm sorry. This goes so far beyond any private property issues or anything else. This is just murder, really. And we see that they're basically thumbing their nose at the whole thing right now. They say, well, you guys can complain out there, but, hey, we got the power. We're on top. We will do what we want to do.
Now, this idea, again, of them censoring individuals, censoring the president, deplatforming and pretty much destroying the business of Parler, at least for the time being. One thing I've mentioned on my show is it does seem to be that they were able to do this, but it does open the doors, for example, for competitors to open their own businesses and build competing markets. I guess first off, under this agenda, would that still be possible for competitors to come about if you have enough money for it, or how would this work?
Yeah. It's going to happen. There's a lot of pop-ups right now that have emerged, and I think there's going to be more. The problem is, I think, is if you get too big, and like in the case of Parler, they were stripping users away from Twitter primarily, not exclusively, primarily. When they got probably to the 15 to 20 million mark of users, these other social media companies probably got a little bit nervous. This is going in the wrong direction. We need to stop this before it gets too big. And I've said this probably many times over the last 2 or 3 years, that the populist movement in America, which elected President Trump, it could have been anybody, but they elected Trump. And they're the ones that really are kind of moving back and forth amongst the social platforms, this populist movement. It promoted populism initially. Now, the big tech companies are scared to death of the populist movement in America. And when Trump said, they're not after me, they're after you, there was some truth to that, I believe. And we see the oppression and the censorship coming against elements within that larger populist movement. And there's obviously different flavors of people that are in the populist movement for different reasons. But everybody seems to be a target right now to shut people up and keep the alternative narrative, that is the narrative that's not their narrative, keep that suppressed. And that seems to be what's happening here.
Now, back to the idea of technocracy and the Great Reset, or whatever we want to call it, sustained development. What would that actually look like? Now, imagine we have it right now. We're living in this, idea. They've accomplished it. What would life look like?
There was a video that was sponsored, well, at least it was associated with the World Economic Forum, where a young lady from one of the Scandinavian countries was giving a little narrative, and she didn't own anything. She said, I don't own anything. I don't own a house. I don't own an apartment. I don't own any, even my clothes, my cooking utensils, everything. I don't own anything. I rent everything. And when I need it, I rent it. And it's just in time rental, to get stuff in. If I need a Dutch oven, whatever, I can get it delivered to my door and rent it and send it away the next day. And I'm very happy, she said. It's a wonderful life. And the idea of the Great Reset is to decrease property rights and remove the concept of private property from the economic system altogether. You can just rent things. It's a service thing, like pay-per-view on anything that you might need. The problem with this is pretty obvious in my view. Okay, so if I want to rent a car for a day, and it's not my car, I rent it, who does own all these things? Somebody's got to own them in order to rent them. This is a very dystopian view of a propertyless society where the people are denied having private property, and let's call it the global elite, the oligarchs, whatever, those giant companies end up owning everything and simply supplying all that stuff to the populace for a rental price. This is not the economic system that America grew up on or knows today. This is altogether different. We're predicated on private property rights as the basis for our economic system. The Great Reset sees that going away. They see everything basically consolidating into a system where they control the resources that are allowed to go into production, and they dictate to the consumer what the consumer is allowed to consume.
And so, in other words, the big businesses themselves will be almost like the government. They will be the ones who they will be the only ones who own anything, essentially. Is this accurate?
In a sense, yes. But, even back in the 1930s, it's interesting that the original framers of technocracy, they believed there was no need for government structure at all. They believed that they could just control the economic system, and thereby there would be no need to have a political system to make decisions for the people or with the people. They thought, hey, we can just do the whole thing. Everybody's going to be happy. If you go back and read Aldous Huxley's book, Brave New World, which is also written in 1932 when Technocracy was at Columbia, you'll get an idea kind of what was in their mind when they developed this system. To say they were egomaniacs, I think, is an understatement, in my opinion, as I studied this originally. I don't know how anybody could come up with this concept that, oh, that's everybody's going to go along with that. That's just wonderful. You'll be happy. But they really believed that. And they even appealed to President Roosevelt, as he was seated as president, to declare himself dictator and for the sake of instituting technocracy. And they told him, just dismiss Congress. Get rid of Congress. You can get rid of the Supreme Court, too. We don't need them. We'll just create an organizational chart. You'll appoint people, president, vice presidents, and directors, and all that kind of stuff. And we'll run the economic system, and everything will be cool.
And if we go back in history, too, I understand that was one of the pseudo-frameworks of not National Socialism, or fascism, which was actually why Henry Ford supported it actually at that time, because it was a society organized like a factory, and of course he used the factory system, and so he liked that. Is this the same as fascism, or is this different? How does this work?
It's still, I will contend personally that it's still different than fascism as well, although there are obvious similarities. So you can't really argue. I wouldn't argue too hard with anybody if they said, well, I think it's fascism. I would have a debate, but I wouldn't press it real hard. So I'm not sure it's really material. The point of where this is going at this point is scientific dictatorship. And I know you've expressed that, for instance, as you've covered the whole concept in China of the social credit system that they have, and now the civilizational credit system, or whatever it is they're calling it. This is going towards scientific dictatorship, where the society is run by algorithm. This is a great danger. This is something that communism, socialism, and fascism has never really seen before. On the other hand, I have to say that Adolf Hitler in Germany was very friendly towards the technocrats of that day. And as soon as technocracy got established here, they also had a chapter in Germany. Hitler didn't allow it to continue as an organization, but he embraced the technocrats in his operation to do the scientific, engineering, statistical things that he had done that almost conquered the world. The technocrats that came out of Nazi Germany after it was defeated, many of them, unfortunately, in my opinion, were brought to the United States under a top secret program that's now been declassified completely, called Operation Paperclip. And they were inducted into the scientific structure in America, and universities and NASA and national laboratories and so on. And they kind of brought this whole technocracy idea back, where the engineers and scientists are running everything. But there was this friendliness in Nazi Germany, which was labeled fascist, towards technocracy.
Now, a lot of people right now are concerned, given the censorship taking place on the internet, that one, their free speech can be taken away, and it already seems to be, to a large extent, accomplished as we speak right now, that it's very difficult. There's a lot of things you can't say online right now. That they face personal attacks, that they're worried that their individual rights are going to be stripped from them. Now, this technocratic idea, does this also, in addition to targeting private property, target individual rights, or how does that work?
No, absolutely. The idea of free speech has been at the heart of every inch of human progress, I believe, since time began, and especially in the last 200 or 300 years. All the discoveries, all of the economic progress, and the ideas that we've had floated were all predicated on free speech. When you curtail free speech, it becomes regressive to society. In other words, you're going backwards when you start to censor. It's the electronic book burning that we have today. It's just like the book burning that happened in Nazi Germany. Stuff is just disappearing from the internet, including the speech of people currently. In every revolution, Marxist or otherwise, or fascist, the first thing the revolutionaries do is they go in and they take over the media. I've seen it happen in my lifetime many, many times. They take over the TV, they take stations, they take over the radio stations, they take over the newspapers. And if they don't just squash them completely and kill them, I remember the protests at Epoch Times, by the way, where there's somebody come in and burned a printing press down. But, they come in and take over the communication mechanism of a country, and then they proceed with the rest of the revolution, the rest of the takeover. This is what's happening in America right now with the attacks on the First Amendment. Free speech is hanging by a thread, and the First Amendment is hanging by a thread, consequently. And the people in the technocratic core now of big tech, they have a narrative that they want to put forth. That narrative is not our narrative. Therefore, we must be silenced. And it doesn't matter where the narrative comes from. It's not exclusively a conservative issue versus some kind of a left-wing guy in one of these companies. You see people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for instance, who's the big, vaccine, anti-vaccine or vaccine critic guy. He's not conservative, he's liberal, but he has been completely silenced by these same organizations. They don't want to hear an alternative narrative. So they are squashing free speech in the process of shutting other people up from, contradicting their own narrative.
There's an interesting dynamic here. Real quick for our viewers, it's actually Epoch Times, our printing press in Hong Kong, was actually set on fire by masked individuals who we believe were tied to the Chinese Communist Party. We've actually faced many things like this over the years. But, it's interesting that on these tech platforms, a lot of them lured people in. They built their entire business model off of allowing people to have a forum to connect and have discussions. And now we see them implementing these different free speech laws, essentially, from the business side, not from the government side. And, it's a dynamic we're watching happen, where even though we're not living in a socialist state, the big businesses are essentially enforcing their own system of laws through the denial of services. And they're leveraging their own pretty much monopolies over these services in order to punish people for violating things that aren't technically illegal. It's a very bizarre dynamic. Now, I guess what I'm interested in hearing from you is there an agenda behind this? And do you think these people are aware of an agenda if there is one?
Yes. I do believe there is an agenda behind it, and I see it from several different aspects. One, just my historical studies, and second, you look at the concentrated attack on all 5 elements of the First Amendment right now. They've all been under attack simultaneously. It would be almost statistically impossible to get them all at the same time. You've got expression of religion, free speech, freedom of the press, the right to assemble, and the right to expect redress of grievances from the government. All 5 of those have been shattered to pieces in the last year, and the attack had started actually before that, probably 5-6 years ago. So you see the attack on the First Amendment, but at the same time, you see people like with the Economic Forum, for instance. Klaus Schwab does routine little video things on social media as well as just on their own website, where he's actually preaching this agenda openly to the corporate world, because he's the founder and the highly respected guy of the World Economic Forum, where everybody goes every year. Maybe they don't know the WEF, and they know the name Davos, D-A-V-O-S, in Switzerland, where they all meet. It's the creme de la creme of economic power that comes to the World Economic Forum conferences. He's openly preaching this right now. I can't call it a conspiracy anymore. It may have been at one time where they just were quiet about it, but now they're openly advocating these policies, and they're basically proud of the whole thing, really. They're saying this is the wave of the future, this is the 4th Industrial Revolution, and you just better get used to it because, hey, we know what we're doing, and we know better than you.
I guess just last question. Now, you have a pretty high-level view of what's happening with all this. Based on what you understand, what is the next step with these individuals in terms of carrying out this agenda? And also, what can people do about it?
Wow, that's a $64 question, isn't it? We're going to see a massive increase in surveillance and control in 2021. It's already started with vaccine passports, with large companies setting their own policies in America, even if they're technically illegal or technically unconstitutional. It doesn't matter. They're doing it anyway. These people that are doing this have adopted a lawless mentality, by the way. They don't think the law applies to them anymore. But we're going to see huge not just censorship, but we're going to see a huge increase in surveillance and what I call the total awareness society, where all the sensors that are placed will track you. There was a story about Venice just recently in CNN Travel, I think it was, that said Venice now is tracking every visitor that comes to town. They know exactly where they are at all times. They follow them around the city step by step. They know everything, what country they came from, when they leave the city. This is like George Orwell on steroids, I have to say. So we're seeing that come, and people have pointed at China for a long time, say, oh, they got it bad over there. My friends, I say, most of the technology that they are using over there originated here, but it was illegal to do it here, so they just gave it to China. Now it's coming back to be re-imported into our country. We're seeing now these very same concepts, ideas, patterns emerge in America, and we're that close from being trapped into this system. It is ultimately a scientific dictatorship. How can we get away from this? That's the big question. When I started Citizens for Free Speech, which is citizensforfreespeech.org, by the way, my concept was that people needed to return to local activism, to get their eyeballs off of Washington, which is not going to save us out here, and focus on their local communities, their own school boards and water boards and city councils and all of the other planning commissions, et cetera, to drive the wokeness out of their own communities and get some kind of sanity back in and rebuild the fabric of America from the ground up. Honestly, I don't think there's anything from the top down at this point that's going to make a whit's worth of difference, because these people are so integrated into government. The government is now promoting many of these technocratic programs that are really kind of capturing us right now. So obviously they're not going to come and rescue us. I think it can only be done on a local level. And Citizens for Free Speech teaches people how to do that. That's what we're trying to do anyway.
Hey, Patrick Wood, great having you on. Thank you.
My pleasure, Joshua.